The proposals, Ms. Karner.
Good evening. We're actually going to review the 2020 CDBG and home funding recommendations, so we're always looking ahead in the CDBG program. As a reminder, our program year is always a challenge for us. It starts on January 1st. However, HUD doesn't typically ask for our action plan until sometime late in the spring or early in the summer. They don't send us the grant agreement for our funds until midsummer. They tend to release our funds to us in September, and then they test us on November 2nd to see if we have more than 1.5 times the allocation within our account. And when we don't, they threaten to take funds from us. So it's a very condensed year. We've actually started the conversation with our consultant about adjusting our program year. HUD has an approach in which they'll give mini grants to compensate for pushing back that timeline. And so we'll continue to evaluate that into 2020 and may bring that as a recommendation to council. So our 19 action plan was not approved until August, and 2020 is also a consolidated plan year. That's when we look for the next 5 years to see how we're going to spend our money in accordance with HUD's objectives. And so in 19, we received $1,335,744 in CDBG funding and $400,540 in home funds. And so what we did was we took a 5% reduction and factored that in. Now, it's a crapshoot. We could get less than what we're projecting, and in that case, we'd be recommending a reduction proportionally for all of the allocations, or we could get more. And so we've been lucky that in years past we projected to get less. It's always easier to say to somebody you're getting more money than to say you're getting less. As a reminder, and so you'll see the 2020 recommendations are $1,268,957, and our home is $380,513. 15% is required to be set aside for community housing development organization of our home fund, so that's just a reminder. We have other requirements of our CDBG funding, and that's a 15% cap on public service activities and a 20% of planning and administrative costs. Planning and administrative is certainly one of the ways in which we fund the city, but so is public service, and so I'll get to that in a bit. We have a robust housing rehab program in which we fund quite a few rehabs on an annual basis, and other city activities include either street overlays or curb cuts. We've funded a lot of curb cuts this past year, but we also look at reconstructions and intersection improvements, all making sure that we're doing that in eligible areas. It's not the citywide. Same with parks. We're going to be doing some ADA and other improvements like fencing and pump upgrades and so forth at some of the parks. We tend to support police overtime, which is a public service activity. We have a dental program, which is an older allocation, which helps low-income individuals from the city receive dental care. It's the youth program. And then we do our planning studies. We helped fund the Northside 2027 last year. We are still doing our saldo, updating our saldo, and continue with our blight remediation efforts. You can see we fund a lot of nonprofit organizations historically, and we're recommending funding again this year for those nonprofits. And we have an application vetting process. So full applications were due on September 6th, and we review those internally and with our consultant at Triad to ensure compliance. This year we tried to, even if they applied for funding for a home, for instance, we found in some instances CDBG might have been the better fit, and so we kind of moved around what some of those funding, the source of some of the funding activities are. They all must be CDBG and home eligible. They must be consistent with the consolidated plan goals. The organizations have to have capacity. You know, certainly trying to work with organizations to build capacity is important to us, but as is making sure that our funding is spent in a timely and compliant fashion. We certainly don't want to duplicate services to the community and make sure we have a meaningful impact on the residents' quality of life. And then we also try to look at how much is unspent. And so they may ask for $75,000. We may see that they still have some unspent funds, and you know, work with them to fund it at a different level than what was requested. We had more than $2 million, almost $2.2 million in requests this year, and we've outlined for you and sent to council previously what those funding recommendations are, and I can go through the list. So program administration, we're recommending the full 20% at $213,791, with $20,000 set aside for CD consulting and North Penn legal services for fair housing activities. Under our public service category, this is the one that's capped at 15%. We have a neighborhood housing organizer for $5,000. That's a reduction from the $35,000, but I think we're able to fund it in another way within the community to accomplish a full-time position that's going to service both the South Side and North Side 2027 and help us with census activity. Center for Humanistic Change, their Crossroads, it's a mentoring program for Lincoln Elementary at $6,000. The Hispanic Center of the Lehigh Valley for their empowerment program at $10,000. Hogarth Korea for their Operations for Drug and Rehab program at $30,000. The Lehigh Valley Center for Independent Living for their PLACE program at $15,000. New Bethany for their payee program at $20,000. Share Care Faith in Action for operations at $9,844. Embrace Your Dreams, which is the First Tee Golf project for low-income kids at $7,500. The YMCA or YWCA Tech Girls program at $7,500. Our Community Policing Initiative at $64,500. And Southside Recreation at $15,000. Those that don't have a limit, we actually had a submission from ArtsQuest and they withdrew. Sometimes when you fund a construction project, it requires so much more to spend the federal funds than it may be worth. And so we worked with them to understand what the impact on the more than $20 million project was, and it wasn't necessarily in their best interest, so they withdrew the application. We're recommending $100,000 for the Bethlehem Food Co-op. $20,000 for the public library, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. $30,000 for South Bethlehem's facade and weatherization program. We've been supporting that for a number of years, and that's how you saw the improvements to Hay Street, for instance, and there's a number of properties along 4th and other areas of the South Side. Catholic Senior Housing, this is the first time. We're recommending $50,000 from a prior allocation for those folks, so not from this 2020, and we'll take that separately to you at council, but we wanted to show you that we're recommending funding for them. Our blight remediation we put almost as a placeholder for $5,000, so we have the opportunity if other funds become available or if we have in it more than what we expect to potentially put more in that line item. The YMCA for child care wing renovations for $75,000 and the food co-op for $5,000 for operations. We have some program delivery costs. We have Community Action is helping us with our it was a program called Hoops to first-time home buyers. We're revamping that and supporting them with $20,000 of CBDG funds so they can support those activities outside of just projects or loans that close. The RDA for administration of our blight program at $10,000, and our program delivery is a way of funding our staff for $130,000 for housing rehab. Put a line item of $100,000 for parks, and Friendship Park is one of those parks that we continue to try to make improvements in as part of our North Side 2027. Public Works to hopefully finish Carlton Avenue, and actual grants and loans for housing rehab at $174,822.